Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. Last year's Brazilian Grand Prix was the weekend where Max Verstappen secured the title beyond any reasonable doubt. He needs a massive weekend this time round, and there's good news coming out of Red Bull that may well be the case. Not only do they have even more upgrades we think on the way, but Laurent Marquis says that yes, they brought loads of upgrades this season compared to McLaren. That does not mean they're going to be at a disadvantage going into 2026. Does this make any sense? Remember to into your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I greatly appreciate it. Wanted to start with a couple of things on Ferrari. I think I said I would link this article down below yesterday. I don't know if I forgot to, so I'll make sure I do it today. If you guys haven't heard about this yet, yesterday we discussed it. Loic Serra is keen to put the Ferrari back to a pushrod rear suspension for the first time since 2010. Couple of other things at Ferrari. The other key thing mentioned in the article is that basically everything with next year's Ferrari is done, at least in the most parts. They've not had to make as many radical suspension changes as they thought they would, because the changes and the tweaks they made this year actually gave them more positivity than could have been the case anyway. So we're expecting to see the new car the week before late January testing. So the end of January testing is going to be, I think they're planning a Barcelona test. Then there are 2 more tests to come in Bahrain after that. So there's going to be a lot of on-track running of these 2026 cars before we turn up to the first Grand Prix. But it looks like maybe we get to see the new car. This, of course, is not the new car, but it is a potential render of what next year's cars may well look like. Especially the front wing is radically different. This intention to get away from the outwash, keep a load of the downforce generation internally to the bodywork. So very different front wing. Got to go back a couple of decades until we've last seen stuff like that. The barge boards are back, but you know, in many respects is a similar looking car to what we have today, just with a couple of key alterations. Again, we'll see what the teams actually cook up. One other update at Ferrari. So his former performance engineer, Riccardo Corte, has left Ferrari. Now, know that many in the replies were like, could it not be another Riccardo? Because some aren't very convinced that Riccardo Adami is doing a great job as Hamilton's race engineer, but he's spent 11 years in Maranello, worked on PU development, worked alongside Leclerc as a driver coach, Sainz as performance engineer. Not been an especially successful tenure. He's out the door. What's he going to? Good question, but just an update that I thought was worth giving. There's also Benedetto Vigna talking about Ferrari. Again, he's the CEO over there. There are other teams where everything seems to run more smoothly. We will continue to work in a united and cohesive way. We need to make sure all the ingredients necessary to win are functioning properly, but the team remains united, right? So it's the absolute classic where in one sentence he says, well, other teams look like they're doing better than us. The next sentence he says, no, we're a cohesive, a united unit. And yeah, sure, say that from the outside, but it doesn't seem that way necessarily when we look in from the outside looking in, as it were. Couple of dramas at McLaren. I just wanted to go through some quotes really on the current championship battle between the McLaren drivers. It was not a great time last year for either McLaren driver around Interlagos. Norris had a perfect opportunity to at least try to close the gap to the championship to Max Verstappen, but as we know, Max snuffed that out very quickly indeed. Now, Bernie Ecclestone is at it again. Look, you've got to take what Bernie says with a pinch of salt because it's Bernie, but I know that people saw this quote today and were like, oh my god, this must be true. But look, when Bernie Ecclestone says something, it just is what it is. It's just comedy in my opinion. But anyway, he does say this. Yes, it looks that way, as in, are McLaren slowing down Piastri? Are they putting him at a disadvantage? McLaren prefers Norris in the second half of the season. Now, I guarantee if you ask Bernie about his opinion on this in a few months, he'll have either changed his mind or he'll say that he doesn't remember ever giving these statements to the media. So it is what it is. But I thought his comments were nonetheless interesting. McLaren prefers Norris in the second half of the season. McLaren favours the English driver Norris. He has more star and marketing qualities for them, more camera presence and publicity. That's probably why it's better for McLaren. Ecclestone stated, Piastri is upset and tired by this, the papaya rules. The discussions about it annoy him, the pressure is mounting. Piastri's frustrated he can no longer win races so easily, and that Norris is obviously favoured within the team. He then went on to say that he thinks Max is going to win it again. So this is a classic Ecclestone type statement. What do you think about this, right? Because look, in my opinion, I don't see how it makes logical sense for McLaren to deliberately disadvantage one of their drivers. As I've said multiple times, in the last 20 years, I think we've been relatively spoiled with championship winners who are just remarkably and robotically consistent. That's not always been the case. Piastri had a great stint this season. Now he's in a slump. Norris had his slump earlier on, quite arguably. It's also quite arguable that Lando has finally figured out the car, or, over the course of the season, McLaren have helped Lando in, the way that they set up the car to make him more comfortable. Not to say they also haven't done that with Piastri to some extent, but there was a feeling right at the start of the season, certainly Lando implied this, that he wasn't getting on as well with this car, just from a natural driving style perspective as Piastri was. Look, would the team deliberately sabotage one of their drivers, especially with Max Verstappen lurking so closely in the championship? You're going to have to give me a lot of evidence before I can believe that, especially when Piastri seemed to be firing in all cylinders with the team in the start of the season. Now, do I think that McLaren would prefer Lando to win? Not the entire team, but certainly I think there are certainly some people on that team that would. I think Zach Brown would be one of them. I also think that Lando's given a lot to McLaren, right? You also got to recognise this to some degree. Not saying that, there's massive bias or they're downplaying Piastri's chances by sabotaging his car or something. But the point is, Norris could have gone to Red Bull. Norris had intrigue from Red Bull. Horner wanted him for a long time. Norris said, no, I believe in McLaren. I believe in the project. And Norris committed to McLaren very heavily, more so than arguably he could or maybe even should have done. I was certainly pretty critical of that decision. That decision has turned out to be a fantastic one in the last couple of seasons. So very understandably, McLaren, I think, would, be very happy if Norris won. Certainly, I think that would be the case for Zach Brown. Does Andrea Stella really care? I'm not so sure he minds either way between the two respective drivers. And I think that Ecclestone has a point when it comes to public presence and persona and kind of what it would mean for McLaren. I think McLaren may well prefer, on the whole, if Lando were to win. Does that mean that they're sabotaging Piastri to make that happen? You're going to have to show me a lot of evidence that that is the case. We'll see what happens in the coming rounds. We've also got some comments from Jacques Villeneuve, so he has a different perspective. He says that Piastri is not stepping up when it matters. Again, we've seen a classic Ecclestone comment. We now get a classic Jacques Villeneuve comment. He was already at his limit. He went on to say, was it actually Piastri stepping up or just Lando wasn't on it for the start of the season? He kept saying that he wasn't comfortable with the car. Maybe that made Piastri a bit complacent. Lando stepped up. He's driving faster than he has been all season. So we'll see where that goes. Brundle says there's no conspiracy. I don't know what you guys are talking about, but as we know, it's Formula One. Everyone is going to have their opinion. What we do know is that McLaren have not brought upgrades for a long time at this point. They will not bring anything else from now to the end of the season. It may not matter. I mean, look, they've won the Constructors a long time ago, but they want to make sure they close out the drivers as well. Their drivers are 1 point apart in the championship. Max Verstappen is lurking relatively close behind Lando, 36 points to Lando, 35 points to Oscar Piastri. What we can say for sure is that Red Bull have brought a raft of upgrades. Over the last 10 Grand Prix weekends, they've brought upgrades on like 9 of them. Maybe it was even like 9 in a row. Certainly like 6 Grand Prix in a row they brought upgrades to, whereas the other teams, maybe half of those races, they brought some sort of a change. So the question for many has been, all right, how have they managed to turn this around, Red Bull? And also, will they be able to keep doing so? Is this a major sacrifice on next year's development to make sure that this year goes to plan? But actually, Red Bull say, no, that's not the case. They believe this approach is better for next year as well. The other thing on the turnaround of this season, Marco talked about a few things and said, Max told the engineers what he needed, which gave him more confidence in the car and made it easier to drive. All the changes and adjustments have come together perfectly. That's why the car is now more competitive. With his experience, Max now has an important voice in the technical discussions. Again, it was important that the engineers started listening to Max more. They did it before, but not to the extent that they do now. So there was a lot of talk about this actually, that they used to rely a lot on simulators and all of that, but now they just listen to what Max tells them to do. They do it, and the car gets better for it. Now, not necessarily everywhere, as we know in Mexico, not a great time from the RB21 in qualifying, especially in the race. They were able to make it work. They made some big sacrifices, right? Because on the Friday, their race pace looked abysmal, but their quali pace was really good. Max and the team recognised that that wasn't going to deliver a result on the Sunday, so they took away a bit of quali pace. They had better race pace as a result, and with Max's, let's say, adventure on turn 1, lap 1, put himself in a reasonable position to fight from there on the inferior medium tyre, as it turned out to be. The car's working window has become larger. Max told the engineers what he needed, which gave him more confidence in the car. I think we've seen that quote further up the article. So that's one thing that's going on. The other key thing, though, for the rest of the season is the sacrifice. This whole idea that, well, Red Bull have given it everything to try and give Max his best chance. And even the team has effectively said this, right? Like Laurent Marquis has said it. We know we're making a level of sacrifice. I think the implication of that has been that they know that they're sacrificing next year's competitiveness to some degree to make this year's competitiveness better and give Max a chance. That's been the overall perception. But actually, Red Bull I'm not saying they're back off that approach, because maybe they never meant it quite like that. Because what McKee says is this: with regards to why we have developed the car a bit more than the competition, he says, thought it was pretty funny, perhaps a bit more than the competition. Like, I think there's no perhaps and there's no little bit, right? Like, Red Bull have very clearly brought a load more changes than any other team has this season. It's got nothing to do with 26. I think, as we have commented a few times, it was as if we were turning the page at the point of the season when we were very unhappy about the car, not reaching the full potential. Then you'd go into 2026 with a load of question marks in your head and a load of wishful thinking. So we have preferred to invest a little bit more in this car. We tried to unlock what we felt had not worked, got a bit of performance out of it. It gives us a lot more confidence in our tools, in our methodologies, in our approaches going into 2026. Yes, there is a cost in the amount of time and energy left for that, so left for the 2026 project, but that is the rationale. It has nothing to do with performance. So this is the interesting implication here, that they don't believe that they are sacrificing anything for next season by doing this, because yes, they are taking some performance and energy away from next year's theoretical level, I suppose, certainly in terms of time commitment. But the conclusion is that it's better to do that, have a better result this year, but then have the confidence in the approaches and the methodologies and what you're building for next year to know that you're not going to sacrifice any performance. I guess the idea is, if they put all of their time on working on the RB21 into next year's RB22, what would they have spent that additional time on? Wondering, querying themselves over whether this is the right idea, whether that is the right idea, doing more stuff in the simulator, doing more stuff in testing to come to conclusions. Whereas the feeling is they've brought changes to the 2025 car. They now understand more to such an extent that those decisions are made anyway. So the belief from Red Bull is that this is purely a net positive. They get the same level of performance next year because the extra time that they could have spent would have been wasted time, effectively, with the understanding that they've now gained. And they get the chance to have a better performance this time around. That's at least their perspective on it. And I think McKees gives another couple of insights into that. For us, it's a net gain. We validate our approaches for 2026. If we thought it would compromise it, we wouldn't be doing it. And that's quite the statement to make, because that is, I wouldn't say it's counter to what they've said before, but there's certainly been an implication from Red Bull before that they recognise they're making a level of sacrifice to give Max the best chance this year. But McKees is adamant that if they thought there was any compromise in them doing this for next year, they wouldn't be doing it. We know that Marco also said that famously in 2021, there was talk about Red Bull spending a lot of money, trying to bring some upgrades. Mercedes said, next year, good luck with that, Buster. And then, of course, Adrian Newey rolled the RB18 out of the garage, and the rest is history. We know there's a price to pay. So, it's interesting kind of contradiction, right? They know that there is a sacrifice, but they don't believe that it's actually going to affect their overall performance. I think the other point is, we were not looking at the championship 5 races ago. We were not looking at the championship before Austin. We were not looking after Austin. It is what it is. So the implication there is that they've not developed the RB21 because they think it's going to give Max a best chance in the fight. They've developed the RB21 because they actually think it's better for next year's development, and it has the side effect of giving Max a better chance this year. What we believe believe there is an interesting question. Again, the good team principals are pretty good politicians as well. We'll see where things go from there. But I wanted to spend the last couple of minutes talking about this weekend in Brazil, because Marco even said the other day they've got yet another upgrade up their sleeves. He didn't say upgrade, but he said we've still got something up our sleeve. I don't know exactly when it will arrive. That was on the 21st of October. So coming relatively soon to a track may or may not be near you, depending where you live. Who knows where they're going to bring it, right? Is it going to be for Vegas? Is it going to be this weekend? Ideally, they could bring it this weekend. We'll see what they come up with. Phenomenal weekend for Max last year, won the Grand Prix from 17th on the grid, one of the absolute all-time generational drives. It rains last year. It's been a good track for Max historically, as we know. Could we see a similar thing this time around? It's also been a good track for Lando, certainly in comparison to his teammates. Yeah, last year wasn't exactly ideal, as we know, but to be fair, with the way that Max was driving, the World Championship was always going his way. Lando feels like he's moved on to some extent since then. These are your drivers with a perfect qualifying head-to-head in Interlagos. Mika Häkkinen, 10-0. Max Verstappen, 9-0. Pierluigi Martini, 5-0. Ayrton Senna, 5-0. And Lando Norris, 5-0 as well in his 5 outings at Sao Paulo. So pretty interesting stuff to think that there's, 2 drivers on the present grid and one who is on a hiatus who have an undefeated qualifying record. If Lando continues that, it should put him in a pretty good spot. You're not betting against Max Verstappen to do the same. Is it going to rain again? Again, it depends who you ask on this one. It feels like things are very, let's say, up in the air right now. It's a sprint weekend, so we have competitive sessions every day of the weekend. Sprint quali Friday, sprint and the qualifying on Saturday, the race on Sunday. There's a high probability of rain, as I say, depending on who you ask. If you go to BBC News or weather or whatever, you'll see that in the middle of the day there is some rain expected. If you go to the Saturday, you'll find even more rain expected, heavy stuff in the morning. Then there's going to be some thundery showers. The Sunday, though, looks pretty dry in the afternoon. That's the way things are going. So it looks more probable as it stands that the race may be dry on Sunday. Now, this would be really, really interesting, especially if the sprint might be wet, then qualifying may or may not be wet, and then the race is dry. It's going to be fascinating what the teams do for setup, right? Because they may run sprint quali with a wet setup for the sprint and then change things entirely for the race on Sunday and then for qualifying later in the day as well. So they might be qualifying Saturday afternoon with a dry setup in the rain. It's absolutely possible. So yeah, it's going to be a messy weekend. We know that the weather can be rather inconsistent as well. So this is how it currently looks. Sprint quali, 45% chance. Sprint race itself, 75% chance. Qualifying, 45% chance. 20% chance on the Sunday. But as I say, depending on who you ask, this individual here who actually does F1 and WEC weather updates, that's his whole page, we've got a more realistic forecast. There's a higher risk of rain in the sprints, but Saturday's forecast is complicated and low confidence. More updates will be needed. Should be a stressful day for the FIA meteorologists and the teams. So stressful day for the teams means entertaining day for us watching at home. So very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.